What's with that look? Get away, you poor person with an annual income of $30,000. Your face is really scary. The envy of the poor is frightening. That's right. Since we're here at the municipal office, why don't the lowlifes just get welfare? The ones I happened to meet at the municipal office I was visiting for some errands were my ex-husband, Henry, and his wife, Katie. They continued to mock me together. They probably thought I would cry and go home, but I had no intention of giving in to them. Without being intimidated by their verbal abuse, I opened my mouth to respond to them. Huh? $30,000 is my monthly income, though? What? My comment made both of them raise their voices in surprise. An annual income of $30,000. I'm not the old Henry anymore. As I laughed loudly, Henry turned bright red in embarrassment and started to retort. The two of them continued to cling to me after that. I finally gave them the punishment they deserved. My name is Debbie Anderson, 50 years old. I am a divorcee currently running a cooking class. I married Henry Irving, my ex-husband, when I was 26 years old. And then I gave birth to our daughter, Brittany. We were just an ordinary family that could be found anywhere. Henry was a company employee, diligently working every day, but he was a bit short-tempered and prone to anger. He held male chauvinistic views, occasionally making derogatory comments about me and Brittany. However, one could say that his feeling of needing to be responsible because he was a man was stronger than anyone else's. In the beginning of our marriage, feeling his masculinity and reliability, our family lived a modest but happy life. I met Henry through an introduction by a senior at my company. My senior was worried about me because I hadn't had a boyfriend even after turning 25. Honestly, I wasn't very attracted to the idea of marriage. I had a stronger desire to work than to get married. But at that time, not many people thought like me, and many believed that quitting one's job for marriage was a woman's happiness. Moreover, every time my parents contacted me, they started talking about marriage. I was living away from my parents because of my job, and I had doubts about whether getting married would be a good way to reassure them. So, when I met Henry, I somehow started to see him as a marriage candidate. It seemed that Henry had similar concerns at that time. Everyone around me is getting married, and my parents keep nagging about marriage. Honestly, I'm not interested in marriage, but if I were to marry, I'd like it to be someone like you, Debbie. One day, Henry said that to me. We weren't deeply in love, but I thought that since Henry and I had similar views on marriage, we could be good partners for each other. And so, we decided to get married less than a year after meeting, but we really had no money. Both of us had been living alone before our marriage, so we had hardly any savings. Therefore, our wedding was really just a small meal with only close family members. We couldn't afford a new home, so Henry moved into the apartment where I was living, and that's how our married life began. Because of our financial situation, I intended to continue working after marriage. Henry had agreed to this before we got married, but once we were married, he started to express dissatisfaction with me working. It was sometime after we got married. So, when is Debbie going to quit her job? His words were like a bolt out of the blue. I responded in confusion. Huh? I plan to keep working. That's what we agreed on. Henry started to grumble his dissatisfaction in response to my words. But working, doesn't that make it look like my income isn't enough? Everyone else quits their jobs when they get married. You should do the same. It was such a reversal from our discussions before marriage that I wanted to ask, what was all that talk before we got married about? The sudden change in his stance was frustrating. I opened my mouth, a bit angry. Why? It's a fact that we have no money, right? You agreed to me continuing to work. But, my boss and manager think you've already quit. I can't tell them you're still working. I was dumbfounded. For some reason, Henry had told his superiors that I had quit my job. Nowadays, it's not unusual for both partners to work. But at that time, society wasn't as accommodating for working women as it is today. Henry, influenced by what others said, started to think it was odd for me to work and began to pressure me to resign. He even went as far as involving his parents, making it a family-wide opposition to my working. You'll have children eventually, right? It's pitiful to leave them in daycare and work. Just quit your job. Henry has told you the same, right? A woman taking care of the home is what works best. Despite living far away, my mother-in-law irresponsibly threw such words at me. I couldn't agree to quit my job until the end, but being cornered by everyone, I ended up having no choice but to stay home. However, that didn't mean Henry's salary increased. The decrease in income directly impacted our lives. All I could do was to cut down on living expenses. Because we had to live on just Henry's salary, we had to tighten our belts and practice strict budgeting. This is all we have for dinner? Before payday, Henry would force a smile upon seeing the frugal meals. Can't help it. We're out of money for this month. But I'm working. I have to eat for both of us. I have to work for your share too. Sometimes, he would say that and take my side dish. Moreover, he would take money for his allowance from our living expenses, saying it was embarrassing to have no money outside. I couldn't discuss such embarrassing matters with anyone. Because Henry said not to tell anyone we had no money, I couldn't even borrow money from my parents. Of course, there was no way I could spend money on my own cosmetics or clothes, and the stress built up because Henry wouldn't allow me to work even in such circumstances. I was thinking it might be better to divorce now when Henry noticed and said, "If we have a child, you won't have to think about unnecessary things." He suggested making a child despite having no money. If I got pregnant under these circumstances, our household finances would be disastrous. I opposed it, saying it was too early, but eventually, I got pregnant, making it difficult to divorce or go to work. Still, I found our daughter Brittany very adorable. Fortunately, she grew up healthy without any major illnesses. As Henry aged, his salary increased a bit. It was still below average, but we got used to saving. Being a full-time housewife, I could attend all of Brittany's kindergarten and school events. Although we had endured a lot and made many sacrifices to get to this point, I finally felt relieved that we had achieved a normal life when one day Henry said, "Maybe it's about time you started working too? Staying cooped up at home will make you age faster." I was at a loss for words at Henry's casual remark. "What do you mean? When we were struggling with no money, you said it was shameful for me to work, and now you're telling me to work?" Henry got upset at my spontaneous reply. "What? You don't want to work? Being a full-time housewife is just laziness." I was shocked by his cruel words. It wasn't that I didn't want to work. I just couldn't stand his attitude and words. The wife of the chief who moved here recently works even though she's married and has kids. And she always looks so put together. And then there's you, Debbie. Don't you think you're pathetic? What kind of face was he making when he said that? Had he forgotten what he had told me? I had so much I wanted to say, but Brittany was nearby, so I held back with all my might. "I see. I'll find some work." I conveyed my frustration, and Henry seemed to smile as if he had one. Then I started working part-time in a nearby job. I worked as a cook in a supermarket. At that time, Brittany was in the upper grades of elementary school. She was still an elementary school student, though she had grown quite a bit. It was an age where I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I had to do household chores. On top of that, balancing work was quite challenging at first, and I was exhausted every day. Henry's attitude remained unchanged despite seeing my condition. "You're struggling over just a part-time job? Try to be more like me," he would say arrogantly every day. But working as a full-time employee and juggling work, housework, and childcare were entirely different. I used to work as a full-time employee and only had to take care of myself, and I don't remember being this tired. It's just a part-time job, but I have household chores too. Can you help a bit? Even just checking Brittany's homework would help, I said to Henry. But he was unwilling to cooperate. Homework? That's a mother's job. Then, at least washing the dishes. I'm tired from work, and you want me to do housework? Housework is a woman's job. No matter what I asked, he would push everything onto me, using the excuse that I was a mother or a woman. I gave up expecting anything from Henry due to his selfish behavior. Then, one day, after about 3 years of working, Brittany fell ill. At first, we didn't know the cause and went to several hospitals. Of course, I took time off from my part-time job during this period and was desperate for Brittany. But Henry's response was cold. She just doesn't want to go to school and is faking it, isn't she? Don't take time off from your part-time job. Your salary will decrease. He showed no concern for Brittany, who looked unwell, and continued drinking beer. Eventually, Brittany's illness was not life-threatening, but we had to visit the hospital for a while. Since I had been frequently absent from my part-time job and would need to take more time off, I couldn't burden them any further and eventually resigned. Henry was furious about this and started to berate me. Can't you even stick to a part-time job? It was only for 3 years? I feel bad about resigning. But it couldn't be helped. Couldn't be helped? You just wanted to go back to being a comfortable full-time housewife, didn't you? No matter how much I explained Brittany's condition and our situation, Henry didn't show any empathy. Instead, he continued to pressure me to work. Struggling with the situation and Henry's verbal abuse, I was desperate to do something. Then, one day, Brittany said, "Mom, I'm sorry you had to quit your job because of me." I was surprised. I knew Henry's words had reached Brittany, but I didn't realize it had made her think this way. Filled with regret and resolution, I knew I had to prove it wasn't Brittany's fault. It's not your fault, Brittany. But I'm happy when you're at home. I want you to stay at home all the time, like before. Brittany. I thought about it and came up with the idea of working from home. But there wasn't much I could do. After much thought, I decided to start a cooking class at home. I had always been confident in my cooking skills. With my experience living alone and working as a supermarket cook, I had a wide range of recipes. Moreover, thanks to working at the supermarket for 3 years, I was able to obtain a cooking license. Thus, I was able to start the cooking class smoothly. Brittany was very pleased. However, Henry only ridiculed me. As if it's going to work out if you do it yourself. Who would want to pay to learn your level of cooking? Stop flailing around and go get a real job, Shudden. Henry constantly grumbled as I prepared for the class. Still, I didn't give up. Surely, if things went well, even Henry would change his mind. But it wasn't easy from the start. I searched for students, but they were hard to come by. Even those who came for a trial session rarely turned into repeat customers, playing right into Henry's narrative. As expected, Henry continued to mock me. Just get a proper job already. He said it so easily, but considering Brittany's hospital visits and sudden illnesses, it wasn't that simple. Henry seemed to have no intention of accompanying Brittany to the hospital, making it difficult for me to go out and work. In the end, I continued the cooking class while wrestling with my thoughts. Then, after some time, a couple of students began attending my class regularly. My family loves the dishes I learned from you, Debbie. My child is a picky eater, but they ate the dish you taught us. Such wonderful people. Furthermore, they brought friends along, and about a year after opening, my cooking class finally began to take off. Brittany was very happy, but Henry only looked on coldly. I could feel he still held disdain for me, but he became increasingly silent over time. About 5 years later, the cooking class was doing well, albeit slowly. Brittany's illness had resolved with growth, and she only needed an annual checkup. We were not wealthy by any means, but we lived happily without any problems. Contrary to this, my relationship with Henry only grew colder. I could clearly feel his displeasure with my success, and I had nothing more to say to him. I thought we could be good partners when we married, But things don't always go as planned. Yet, we were a couple that had come this far together. I thought we would continue to live out our days in this indifferent relationship until one day when high schooler Brittany came home from school with a troubled look. "What's wrong? Did something happen at school?" When I asked, Brittany solemnly began to speak. "I saw Dad walking with a woman I don't know." "Your dad? Someone from work? What about it?" "No." They were arm in arm, looking close. I felt the blood drain from my face upon hearing those words. I immediately understood it was an affair, but I wasn't shocked by the affair itself. I was pained that Brittany had to witness that scene and get hurt. It might be a misunderstanding. "I'll talk to your dad about it." "Okay. Sorry for bringing this up." "No, thank you for telling me, even though it was hard. It's not your fault, so don't worry about it." I comforted Brittany with a smile, but I was seething inside. That night, sensing the mood, Brittany went to her room early. "Brittany's going to bed already?" "That's early," Henry said carelessly. Later, after watching for a while, I broached the subject. "By the way, Brittany said she saw you walking with a woman." "Me with a woman? Must be a mistake." Henry responded with a forced smile, but I didn't miss the evasion in his eyes. "Just tell me the truth, and I'll forgive you." I glared at him as I said this. "There's nothing to tell," Henry stammered. But perhaps realizing he couldn't talk his way out of my gaze, he laughed offensively. "Well, I am popular, after all. Maybe something like that happened." "Don't be ridiculous. Brittany got hurt because of it? What were you thinking?" "What? I've been nagged about money forever. Turned the house into some cooking class or whatever. There's no place or comfort for me in this house, so what's wrong with seeking solace outside?" I was speechless at his words. Yes, running a class at home might have been an inconvenience. Still, Henry and the students never crossed paths. Even after classes ended, he mocked, "Oh? No one came today? Not popular, huh?" I was cleaning up, yet he was too oblivious to people's presence to blame his discomfort on the cooking class. Moreover, our financial issues weren't new and were partly due to Henry. Yet, he used that as an excuse for his infidelity, hurting Brittany, which was unforgivable. However, the income from the cooking class wasn't enough for Brittany and me to live on. Knowing I had no choice but to endure, Henry said, "If you're unhappy, let's get divorced. I've been continuing this marriage thinking of you, but marrying her might be for my happiness." "Wait. Brittany's school fees are coming up. Earn it with your cooking class or whatever." "So, it's settled then." "Divorce." Henry said that and actually brought home divorce papers the next day. I was discarded. Not just me. Henry abandoned his own daughter, Brittany, as well. I negotiated for child support, educational expenses, and even demanded compensation for his infidelity. Reluctantly, Henry agreed, so I consented to the divorce, but I never received any payments, starting another cycle of struggling with my bank account. Yet, even as a single mother, I never forgot to smile, supporting Brittany and living on together. It was a period of relentless effort, but the hardship didn't last forever. A few years after the divorce, my daughter Brittany, now a working adult living far away due to her job, decided to get married. She needed her family register copy for the marriage registration, so I went to the municipal office. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Henry Irving, oh wow, isn't that the teacher?" A mocking tone. Turning to look, sure enough, there was Henry. "Are you still running that cooking class, ma'am?" His words, mixed with politeness, felt even more mocking. I abruptly turned away, only for the woman next to Henry to laugh. "Henry, that's rude. She's your ex-wife, right?" "Right." Thanks to her agreeing to the divorce, I could marry Katie. I should be grateful. Apparently, the woman next to him named Katie was the mistress Brittany had seen. She didn't seem the least bit remorseful for her actions as a mistress. Not only did she not pay any compensation, but she also didn't apologize. The woman looking down on me next to Henry looked wealthy. Involuntarily, my gaze was drawn to the brand name bag in her hand. Noticing this, Henry laughed even more mockingly. Katie's parents own a company. You're envious of this bag, aren't you? You could never afford it in your lifetime, could you? I'm not envious at all. Pretending won't help. How much do you earn now? About $10,000 a year? It seemed Henry had grown even more arrogant thanks to Katie's wealth. $30,000. I responded curtly. Huh, $30,000. Well, you're trying somewhat. But with an annual income of $30,000, you can't even afford decent food. Henry continued to loudly mock me. I wonder why he keeps pestering me like this. I glared at him sharply. What's with that look? A poor person with an annual income of $30,000 should disappear. Really, such a scary face. The envy of the poor is frightening. Since we're at the municipal office, why don't the lowlifes just get welfare? Katie joined in mocking me. They probably thought I would cry and go home, but I had no intention of giving in to them. Without being intimidated by their verbal abuse, I opened my mouth to respond. Huh? $30,000 is my monthly income, though? What? An annual income of $30,000. I'm not the old Henry anymore, I said loudly, laughing. As expected, Henry turned bright red and lashed out at me. What? Back then. You were always in the $30,000 range until we divorced. I really suffered marrying such a vain poor man. He hadn't expected a comeback. Trembling with anger, Henry looked utterly ridiculous. Now, you're married to a lady living off her parents' success. Lady? Katie seemed offended by my words, glaring at me. Yes. You're only a few years younger than me, right? It's ridiculous to be so dependent on your parents being the president of a company at your age. Do you even work? Faced with my question, Katie fell silent. Henry had nothing to say either. It seemed the two of them were living off Katie's parents without working. Realizing this, I couldn't help but laugh. It's sad for the parents to have to support a grown man and woman. What did you say? Henry almost raised his hand to me in anger. But he must have realized the consequences of such an action in a public place and reluctantly lowered his hand. A lying old woman like you has no right to talk about someone else's home. Oh, I'm not lying. Besides, you were the first to meddle in someone else's affairs, weren't you? How could a woman like you be earning $30,000 a month? I began to speak with a smile forming on my lips. Does Katie not cook at all? Cook? That's what the help is for. Don't lump me in with the poor. Our maid's truffle pasta is exquisite. The vegetables are from our company too. Katie laughed triumphantly, but my smile only grew wider. Is that so? What's with that creepy smile? I'm glad you like the dishes I came up with. At those words, both of them were taken aback. After divorcing Henry, I continued my cooking class. But the class alone wasn't enough to sustain a living. I decided to close down, but my students, not wanting me to quit, brought many new people. People called more people, and 3 months after the divorce, my cooking class became so popular that it was hard to get a reservation. We want more people to know about your cooking. Furthermore, a student who worked at a publishing company suggested I publish a cookbook. First, we published a cookbook for housewives. Thanks to these housewives spreading the word on social media, the book sold incredibly well, despite the era. In those challenging times, I also wrote a cookbook for toddlers, recalling the snacks I made with Brittany when she was in kindergarten, and a book on budget-friendly recipes from the days we struggled. Recently, I've even published books featuring slightly more upscale recipes, covering a variety of culinary genres. Among them, the recipe for pasta using mushrooms and truffle salt has spawned various adaptations and continues to buzz on social media. Katie's household help must have seen it and decided to try it out. I take pride in the fact that pasta isn't something a typical person would think of on their own. You came up with that? Yes, that's right. I'm glad so many people have enjoyed making it. Katie was speechless at my words. If she had made it herself, she might have recognized my name as the creator, but it seems she only boasted about dishes made by others. The fact that I was the one who created it never crossed their minds. They fell silent, probably realizing my monthly income of $30,000 wasn't a lie. Well, I'm quite busy, so... The bravado from earlier vanished. Leaving the disheartened pair behind, I finished my errand and left the municipal office. However, that evening, another incident occurred. Henry came to visit my home. Having continued my cooking classes after the divorce, I hadn't moved out of the apartment. Regretting not having moved, I reluctantly went to the entrance to greet Henry. About earlier, I'm sorry. Greeting Henry at the entrance, his smirking face gave me a bad feeling. What do you want? Well, you know, I supported and cooperated with your cooking class, right? We didn't divide our assets when we divorced, and I was thinking it's time to properly split the money now. My bad feeling was confirmed. Henry had come with the intention of claiming my money. What are you talking about? I don't recall any support from you. All I remember is being ridiculed. Support was the furthest thing from the truth. And asset division? What are you talking about? Come on. You have money, right? When we divorced, we're supposed to split it. We didn't do that, so let's divide our assets now. I was dumbfounded. What was he thinking? How could he think he had the right to my earnings? It was baffling. Oh, is Brittany here? She must be grown up by now. She'd want to see me, wouldn't she? Henry was still in a good mood, peering into the house as if expecting to see Brittany. I closed the door to block his view. Brittany isn't here. What? She lives far away now. She's getting married soon. Hearing this, Henry's eyes lit up. Part of me thought he might genuinely be happy for Brittany's happiness, while another part wondered if he had any paternal feelings at all. However, my thoughts were quickly dashed. The guy? Is he rich? Well, he's serious about his work, but... Lucky her. She got her looks from me, so it's easy for her to marry into money. Women have the escape route of marriage, which is nice, huh? I had to resist the urge to slap him. I had hoped and been let down too many times. Thinking he might have a shred of fatherhood, I was foolish. Henry had no sense of fatherhood. The wedding? I'll have to make sure I'm free. As if it was natural for him to attend, Henry stated his intention to be there. You'll have to ask Brittany about that, but if you want to meet her future husband, they're visiting this weekend. You could come by for a greeting. Henry nodded happily at my suggestion. He was supposed to come to pick up the family register copy and mentioned we could have a meal then. After saying he would come again, Henry left. I sighed as I watched his retreating figure. Then, the weekend arrived. For some reason, Henry brought Katie with him to our home. Katie was a complete outsider. Unsure of why she came, I let them in anyway. Brittany and her fiancé, James, who had arrived earlier, looked puzzled at the sight of them. Why is Dad here? And with her? It's been a while, isn't it harsh to greet me like that? You're getting married, right? Henry cheerfully spoke to Brittany, who looked at me with a questioning gaze. I smirked and addressed James. James, this is Brittany's father, my ex-husband Henry, and his current wife, Katie. Hello. Brittany had told him about her father and the circumstances of my divorce. It seemed James didn't have a high opinion of them either. James greeted them with a hesitant nod. I continued. You know, we didn't divide our assets when we divorced. I haven't received any compensation. Come on, let's not talk about that today. No, it's a good time. James is a lawyer, after all. Katie's here too, so I wanted to discuss this properly. Katie's eyes widened at my words. Looking for help, she turned to Henry. Brittany seemed to understand the real reason I had invited Henry today and smiled. Compensation. I've heard about the situation. Based on the cases I've handled so far, for your mother-in-law, it's feasible to expect at least $10,000. $10,000? Really? Katie exclaimed loudly, panicking. It's understandable. Being wealthy doesn't mean much if she doesn't earn her own money. She'd likely have to ask her parents for it. Henry spoke up, visibly irritated. Why not just deduct it from the asset division and give it to me? I couldn't help but burst into laughter at Henry's remark, and James looked on, puzzled. Asset division? I was informed that at the time of the divorce, your mother-in-law had virtually no money. She might not have had it then, but she has it now. Asset division pertains to property acquired during the marriage. James explained to Henry with a look of disbelief. Based on the divorce date, there was about $3,000 in savings. So, by simple calculation, you'd owe my mother-in-law $1,500. What? Things went as planned, and I felt a slight sense of relief. When we divorced, Henry took all our savings. Though it may not make a difference now, having that money back then would have significantly helped us. James, I'd like you to ensure the payment is made properly. Could you mediate for us? I formally requested James's assistance in front of them. Henry and Katie could only look at each other, turning pale. Later, a formal demand was made, but, as usual, no payment was forthcoming. However, I couldn't burden James or Brittany any longer. I decided it was time for the last resort. I've decided to terminate our contract. I notified the produce company I had been dealing with. Since publishing my book, I had entrusted all my vegetable needs to this company. Additionally, the meal kits using vegetables for my recipes were well received, contributing significantly to the company's revenue. It had been a mutually beneficial agreement. The reason for considering contract termination now was precisely because of Henry and Katie's actions. As expected, the company president and vice president came to see me immediately. Was there any mishap? The meal kits are still very popular, and we anticipate continued sales growth. Terminating the contract now would be. Both the president and vice president pleaded for contract continuation with troubled expressions. I'm grateful for your company's support and appreciate it. But I no longer wish to be involved. I firmly stated my position, causing both men to sweat as they searched for a reason. I then revealed the answer as if it were the final piece of the puzzle. To put it precisely, I no longer wish to be involved with Ms. Katie, the president's daughter and the vice president's sister. Indeed, the produce company I had been contracting with was Katie's family business. Of course, I was unaware of this initially. However, Katie's remarks about our company's vegetables and being the president's daughter led me to suspect. There aren't many produce companies around here. Reviewing the contract, I found Katie's name on the company's corporate registry. Katie, who claimed not to work, was clearly a nominal executive. Knowing the vice president had a sister and realizing the family connection, I was torn about how to handle this revelation. Despite ongoing insincerity from both Henry and Katie, it seemed unfair for me to continue obliging them. I disclosed the entire truth to the president and vice president. I can't believe. Katie's husband is Ms. Debbie Anderson. He did something so outrageous. Both were pale and profusely apologetic. I'm terribly sorry. We will remove Katie's name from the board of directors. Also, Dad, you need to take responsibility for spoiling Katie. Yes, that's true. Ms. Anderson, I am truly sorry for the trouble my daughter has caused. Following this, the president resigned. Katie's name was removed from the board of directors, and naturally, any financial support she had was cut off. That Debbie, running the cooking class here, is a damn old hag. An enraged Katie spent several days shouting this outside our apartment, which led to the entire incident being exposed on the internet. The produce company faced a difficult situation, but I decided to renew the contract, impressed by the vice president's character and response. He kept apologizing to me, but thanks to him, I was able to receive the compensation payment smoothly. What happened to Henry and Katie afterward goes without saying. Without work, the only thing awaiting them was a life of poverty. They were abandoned by their family and seemed to be living in a cramped apartment. I found out about this through a call from Brittany. Dad asked me for money. Of course, I said no. The shame of having to beg their daughter for money, unable to rely on anyone else. He's working at a day labor factory now. He should have never quit his job. Marrying that woman, he must have thought he became rich and got too carried away. Brittany said, laughing heartily. Her laughter allowed me to laugh as well. I had always been angered by Henry, but finally, it felt like he got his comeuppance. I know the hardships of living without money. Now, I want Henry to experience that hardship firsthand. I continued to work smoothly afterward. Now, encouraged by Brittany, I also post recipe videos on video sharing sites. Nothing makes me happier than knowing people find joy in my cooking. Brittany is expecting a baby soon. I'm thinking of creating a cookbook for delicious baby food recipes next.